Okay, in this video, we're going to build a UHF and VHF broadcast television antenna. Lots of people like to call these HD TV antennas. It's just a TV antenna, whether the signal being broadcast is HD or not. Now granted, most signals being broadcast these days are HD, so you can call it whatever you want. HD, TV antenna, whatever. And so you've probably seen these built in some other videos where people take a 2x4 and put the little V-shaped elements, attach them to the 2x4 with the wire. And this is the same exact antenna, the same concept. I'm just trying to make it a little more classy looking. Gonna hang it outside, mount it outside, and just want it to look kind of nice. So anyway, what we're starting with is this 4-foot piece of 1-inch aluminum tubing. I will show you the end of it here. So pretty decently thick walls in the tubing, and like I said, it's 1-inch square. That's the outside diameter, and it's 4 feet long. You can maybe get this at your local hardware store, Lowe's or Home Depot. You can try. Mine didn't have the sizes I wanted, so I ordered them from onlinemetals.com. Then these are what we will make the elements out of. It's just 1/8 inch diameter aluminum rod, also from Online Metals. And just this aluminum, the square tube and the rods are what I purchased from Online Metals, and that was like $11 worth of aluminum right there, so not too bad. Then I said that it was going to be a UHF and VHF, and so I've got these pieces of scrap antenna off of just, an old school broadcast TV antenna that are just aluminum, round aluminum tube, hollow in the middle. If you don't have any of these scrap pieces, if you don't have an old antenna that you can take apart or whatever, then you can also buy the round aluminum tube on onlinemetals.com as well. And like I said, you can tell I just cut that off of the antenna that it used to be on. And that's a really thin gauge also. If you buy it from Online Metals, it's a very thin gauge aluminum tube. It's very, very light. So we'll cut those down to the length they need to be, and I'll show you where to attach those. And then there's all of our hardware that we'll attach everything with. The last note is this piece of high density polyethylene plastic. I think that's what it's called. High density polyethylene, HDPE plastic. And this is 3/4 of an inch thick this way, and I believe it's 1.5 inches wide. And then what I bought was a 12.5 inch long piece, because as you see the markings I've already made on it, I'm going to cut them into 2.5 inch pieces, and I need 5 of them, because these 5 pieces are what's going to serve as our insulators that will attach to the aluminum square tube, so that all of our elements and stuff aren't making contact with this tube. That would be no bueno. And then the last thing that we'll need is some wire. It doesn't have to be super heavy gauge wire. I don't have it sitting out here on the bench yet. I have a roll of it. I want to say it's like, I think what I have might be 16 gauge wire. I'll maybe try to be a little more specific on that later when we actually get into putting it together. But the hardware that I'm using is all bolts and nuts. So I'll be drilling holes through our beam, through our 1-inch square aluminum tube, and then of course drilling some holes through the plastic pieces to mount them to this, and then the holes necessary on each end of these to mount the V-shaped elements to. So anyway, that's the gist of what we're going to be doing. I'll continue the video later when I've got my holes drilled and my pieces cut and we're ready to assemble. One other note that I didn't mention just a second ago was that the piece of HDPE, high density polyethylene plastic, that I bought, I also bought from Online Metals. I know it's onlinemetals.com, but they actually have a plastics section as well, so that you can purchase from there also. You might be able to find this stuff cheaper, or you might be able to find something that you could use in its place, because it wasn't cheap. Like this one piece with shipping, I think was like I want to say maybe $12. It was more than the metal, so it's not cheap stuff, but it is very, very stout. I mean, it is super heavy duty. It is extremely thick, and as the title says, it's dense. Very, very dense. So it's good stuff. Like I said, it's not a must-have. If you can think of something else to use as the insulators to attach to the tube that you will then attach the elements to, whatever works. So anyway, and then the other thing that I missed also was that we'll need a matching transformer, a VHF UHF matching transformer that will connect how you actually connect the coax to the antenna once we're done building it, that runs down to your television. So alright, we'll be back when I'm ready to assemble. Okay, I know in the last little segment there I said we'd be back when I was ready to assemble, but I decided to show some progress updates. So first thing, the aluminum rod, the solid aluminum rod that I had, there were 3 of them, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier either. Those were also each 4 feet long. They were the same length as my long aluminum tube here. So those 3 I marked in 8-inch increments, and I cut. So basically, there's one of those 4-foot rods. There's another one, and there's the third one, because you get 3 16-inch pieces out of each rod. And what I will do next is mark the exact middle of these 16-inch pieces, and that's where I will bend them to make my V. And again, you bend it. I'll go more into detail with this when I have bent them already and can show you. But you bend them into the V to where the space between here and here is about, I want to say it's like about 5 inches or 5.5 inches. I'll be sure next time I talk about them. So anyway, got those done. Ended up, of course, actually with 9 pieces. We won't use one of them because there's only going to be a total of 8 V's, 8 elements that come off the antenna. Well, 8 of those anyway, and then there's going to be the 2 VHF elements that we attach in the middle. Okay, so the other thing that I've done now is I marked off my aluminum tube where we're going to drill some holes all the way through. So I came down from the top about 2 inches to make my first mark right in the middle of the tube, about 2 inches down. And you come down 8 more inches and make another mark right in the middle. So from your first dot to this dot, 8 inches. Then you come down only 4 more inches to make one more mark, another 4 inches, one more mark, and then 8 more inches, your final mark where we'll drill a hole. The V-shaped elements will attach at this level, this level, this level, and the bottom level. The middle, the very middle dot there is where the matching transformer will attach, and it's also where we will attach our VHF elements that we're going to make. So that's the progress I've made thus far. Gonna get my holes drilled. Still haven't got my plastic insulators cut. That piece is still here, but of course then once I get these plastic insulators cut, I'll have to drill a hole in the middle of each one of those for them to attach here. My plan also is to route out using a straight router bit, a 1-inch groove that goes, you know, all the way through here. So 1-inch wide groove through here, so that each one of these can kind of sit down on my aluminum tube somewhat. It'll prevent them from being able to turn, and then there'll just be one of those bolts that will go through each one of the insulators, and then of course the aluminum tube, and then a nut and a locking washer on the other side. So I'll be back with another progress update shortly. Okay, so just real quick, I've put the bend into all of my elements. So as you can see, I marked them. I think you can see that little mark that I made in the middle, and then just right there at the mark is where you bend them. And again, what I said a little earlier, sorry, video's getting a little out of focus there, the bend needs to be leave a gap of 5.5 inches from this tip to this tip. So that span right there should be 5.5 inches. And with this aluminum, I've made one of these antennas before, and I didn't use aluminum for the elements here, the V elements. I used a really thin gauge steel rod, and it was harder to bend, but I think maybe is a little less brittle than the aluminum, because the very first one that I did, as you see over here, as I was bending it, just snapped right in half. So my suggestion with this aluminum is bend it very slowly. What I did was I took a pair of vice grips, I put them in the vice grips, clamped down on them with the mark just a little outside the jaws of the vice grips, and then bend that direction. And like I said, bend it slowly, you know, get the initial bend to where you've got at least an L, I would say, in the aluminum. Take it out of the vice grips, and then just kind of slowly keep bending it until you get it down to 5.5 inches. You don't want to bend the heck out of it to where it gets to be less than 5.5 inches, and then you got to spread it apart again, because of course that's just going to weaken the aluminum even more. So just give it a real slow and, you know, bend until it gets to 5.5 inches gap. So there's all my elements. Then also back here is our aluminum tube. We'll call this the beam of the antenna. Makes the most sense. It's the beam. It's the thing that everything else attaches to. So those holes, as you can see, go all the way through. Like I said, put it on a drill press, and you saw my markings earlier, so I just drilled right through there. And so now all I have left to do is cut my plastic, make the cuts on it, drill the holes in it, and then it's time to assemble. Oh, and I need to cut down my VHF elements also, which right now off the top of my head, again, I can't remember exactly how long each one of these need to be, but I'll let you know how long each one needs to be. Okay, we're just about ready to assemble here. You remember the big long white piece of plastic we had, and it is now cut into the 5 separate pieces. And then each one of those pieces has our groove cut into it. So we cut the solid piece up into the 5 pieces with a bandsaw. Just marked off where I wanted to cut and ran it right through the bandsaw. And then this we did with a router, a straight router bit. And not gonna lie, this was a little bit of a bugaboo. You'll notice we took off about 1/4 of an inch, went down about 1/4 of an inch, and again, these are what's going to sit on top of our beam right there, and that's what our elements will attach to. But anyway, what we should have done, hindsight, we should have only taken off maybe 1/8 of an inch at a time, if that. We had the router bit set a little too high, and so that thing would grab one of these suckers and I mean toss it across the room. We finally, after the first or second piece, kind of got a rhythm down with a push stick and one guy holding it down while the other guy pushed it through the router bit. But anyway, so cut it up with a bandsaw, used a router to cut the groove. You can figure that part out. It was a little bit of a pain in the butt. This stuff is very hard. And then the VHF elements that I've been talking about that we will add to this antenna. This is the ones that we cut off of just an old scrap antenna. Again, if you don't have an old scrap antenna, you can just, buy the little the hollow aluminum tube off of Online Metals. And what you'll cut those to is 1 foot 2 inches. So from there to there is 1 foot 2 inches. And then you just use some pliers or whatever and smash down the end on one end, crimp it down so that you can drill a hole through this, and it is going to attach to one of our insulators. So you'll see when it's all said and done. So the last thing I have to do before we start assembling is drill all my holes in the insulators, the one hole in the middle of each insulator, which will attach it to the beam, and then 2 holes, one out on this end, one out on this end, which is where the elements will all attach. So I will drill those holes, and when we are ready to assemble, we'll continue. Okay, I've got all my holes drilled in my insulators, 3 holes per insulator, and I've got the insulators mounted to our beam now. The bolt that I use to mount these is a 1/4 inch by 2 inch long bolt with a flat washer on top, and then over here on the bottom a lock washer. You can see a lock washer there and the nut holding it on. And of course, since we routed it out a little bit, they kind of sit down over the beam like I mentioned before. So my 2 other holes, of course, are where all of the elements will attach. The V-shaped elements will attach to this insulator, that insulator, then we skip this middle one, and then they'll attach to this insulator and this insulator. This middle insulator is where, sorry, there's a loud car driving by. This middle insulator is where your matching transformer connects, so that you can connect coax to the antenna to get it down to your televisions. And that is also where we will connect our VHF elements, which, by the way, I also got those drilled. Remember, these need to be cut down to 1 foot 2 inches, and then you just flatten the end. You can see there, mash them down with some pliers, and then drill a hole in them so that we can mount them to these insulators. One facing this direction, and one will be facing this direction. And then everything will be connected to one another with just some regular old electrical wire. I think what I'm using is 18 gauge electrical wire that's just got a little, PVC shield. Pretty small stuff, but that wire will attach underneath this bolt and washer that we'll put here to attach the element to. It will then come diagonally across over to this. It'll make contact here, then come down, make contact here, come down, make contact there. Then it will do one more diagonal shot over to here and make contact here. And then the other wire, vice versa, it'll start on this side, making contact with all of this, the element here, and it'll come diagonally across, make contact there, come down, make contact there, make contact there, and then diagonally shoot across to make contact here. So if you can mentally see this before I actually do it, there's going to be crisscrossed wires right here, and there's going to be crisscrossed wires right here. And where they cross, they cannot be touching one another. So that's why I just use a little shielded electrical wire. If you just have bare wire and that's all you're using, then you just need to insulate them somehow where they cross, wrap them with electrical tape, whatever. And then everything will connect to these insulators where the remaining holes are. All of the elements and the wire that I'm talking about, they're going to connect the same way I connected the insulators themselves to the beam. Just a quarter inch bolt with that flat washer, so that everything can kind of get sandwiched underneath that flat washer right here, and it'll all be making contact with one another. And then again, the VHF UHF matching transformer with its two little leads will connect right there. And that's what comes down to the actual coax connection, where you twist that on to feed it down to your televisions. So I will finish doing the assembly, since I can't do it while I'm holding my phone here, and I'll be back with you when hopefully it's all finished. Okay, so got it all assembled here. There were a couple things that I didn't mention in a few of the previous segments that I never got around to mentioning for some reason, I guess. And that is the spacing, one of them, between these two holes. The holes that got drilled in the insulators that the elements actually mount to, those need to be about 1.5 inches apart, 1.25 to 1.5 inches apart. Now, because of the material I used here, this is the first one I've ever built that was using all aluminum beam and the insulators and whatnot. But the aluminum beam, if you remember, is 1 inch thick. So by the time you got outside of that beam, these are about 1.5 inches away. 1.25 inches would be more ideal, but you just literally couldn't be that close. Next time I build one, I might try with 3/4 inch square aluminum tube for the beam as opposed to 1 inch. But the reason that really matters as much as it does is because, let me flip it over to the back here. When it comes time to assemble it, all of these bolts, and there's a lock washer down here on each one. You see underneath the nut there. And none of that can touch the beam. You don't want that touching. And as you can see, man, I've got just a tiny little hair between that washer and nut and this beam. And you don't want any continuity. You don't want any of that touching the beam, or it will mess everything up. So, like I said, next time I might try 3/4 inch square aluminum tube as opposed to the larger 1 inch. But at any rate, so you see what I did on each one was you bring the bolt through, and then your lock washer and your nut on the bottom there, and on the front, on the top, is where you attach your V elements, and then underneath that washer also is this wire. Now, the wire that I used is this, just, regular old 14 gauge, electrical wire. And again, I stripped back the shielding everywhere where it was going to be making contact. See if I can get closer here and get that in focus. So there you go. You see it's underneath there. Same with under here. And at each point where it bolts on, I've stripped back the shielding so that it's making contact with the actual wire. Also, if you notice, another thing I did was I went to just a lock washer on this bolt that's holding the actual insulator to the beam. Right underneath each one of those now is just a lock washer, as opposed to the big, 1/4-inch washer, because those ended up being a little too large. By the time you got both of them on here, and then that middle one, these were wanting to be making contact with that center one, and of course, again, that's no good. So that is the completed antenna. Of course, the VHF elements that are attached here in the middle. Oh, you might be wondering, where is the matching transformer? And I put that on the back, so it's connected to both of these bolts here. It doesn't really matter that it's not on the front, so as long as it's making contact at this point, which is that very middle insulator. And so I put some terminals on the end of that, on the end of this matching transformer, that let me just, slide it up under that lock washer that I put on those. And it's a weatherproof matching transformer that I ordered off Home Depot. And then it also comes with this little boot that I'll slide on to the coax before I attach the coax. And then once the coax is attached, that'll slide up, and it has some ridges that slide up over there just to keep as much water out as possible. So that is it. I will take it and set it up over here, stand it up so you can see the final product as a whole. I know it's against that metal cabinet, sorry, not a lot of contrast, but that's it. And so I will just mount that to my mast with some mast clamps down on this part of the pole. And I've already tested it indoors, and I get 40-some channels just with the thing sitting in my bedroom, so hopefully it'll be even better up on the roof. So that's the finished product. If you have any questions, you can leave a message or a comment in the video. I'll try to answer them.